We made this.
Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast, is now on Patreon, where you can support the show's production and gain access to all kinds of bonus features and content. To subscribe, check out what we offer at patreon.com/Make It So podcast. That's patreon.com/Make It So podcast. Thanks for listening, and Helmsman,
engage. I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise.
Michael Burnham, pleased to meet you.
What we leave behind is not as important as how we've lived.
We will continue exploring, discovering new worlds, new civilizations. That is the United Federation of Planets. That is Starfleet.
Make it so.
Hello and welcome back everyone to Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast on the We Made This podcast network. I'm your host Tony Black this week, and my co-host Kurt North will be back for the next episode, but I'm very happy to be joined by a very special guest to talk about Season 1, Episode 4 of Star Trek Discovery, The Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry. Today with me is celebrated author of not just Star Trek novels, but many, many, many works beyond, Greg Cox. Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show.
No problem. Looking forward to it.
We've spoken once or twice before, I think, on other podcasts and things like that, and it's really nice to have you come on to Make It So, because you have a long-standing role in Star Trek writing and fandom and all this kind of thing. So I'm really, before we start talking about the episode, I'm really keen to find out what you think really about this new era of Star Trek that began with these first episodes of Discovery and has since encompassed Picard and is going to encompass other shows to come. So since it all started again in 2017 on television, how has it been for you?
Oh, I've been enjoying the new stuff thoroughly. In fact, I'm kind of going through withdrawal now because I got used to having, a new Picard episode to look forward to every Thursday, and that was my Thursday routine now. So I am sort of sitting here counting the days for, season 3 of Discovery to show up, and all the more so having now gone back and watched, how it all began. In fact, in preparation for this discussion, I not only ended up watching season 4, but ended up watching episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4. And boy, that seems like such a long time ago now. Wow. It's been a while since I watched that first season, and that was, it's before Pike and Spock and Number One and the Red Angel, and oh my God, throwing my brain back then, Again, it was addictive. I ended up, I'll just watch episode 4 to refresh my memory. Well, okay, I'll watch the Vulcan Hello and Battle of Binary Stars, and the danger is going to be now, since it's a very serialized show, and which makes it harder to sort of distinguish individual episodes from each other. It's not like, that's the Salt Vampire episode.
Yeah.
It's going to be, I'm going to have to watch myself here. No, wait, that was context is for Kings, not the Butcher's Block. Okay, but
that's the downside of this style of storytelling. But it's good that it made you want to go back and watch those first 3 episodes, though. That clearly, watching number 4, it reminded you of what you did enjoy about the show, I guess, to go back and watch the previous 3. Well, also, I just wanted to ask you about what you thought about Picard as well, and I mean, was that, obviously we're around a month since that finished now, so we're still thinking about it, analysing it, and things like that. So did it work for you? Was it a good first season?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it gave me something to look forward to on Thursday afternoons, and in fact, I had to watch myself that I would watch the episode and then go online and read all the responses on the various Trek message boards and everything. I was like, okay, well, there went Thursday. So,
Yeah, it was a nice thing to come to the end of the week.
I really like the new crew and the new characters, and especially when the new crew started to gel and you got the banter between them and everything. And I'm definitely on for next season.
Great.
Also to see some more familiar faces.
Well, as we record today, I've just seen an article suggesting that LeVar Burton is in talks to come back as Geordie, which makes a lot of sense, really. I think, I think I've said this on the podcast before. I think Worf will be back as well at some point.
I'm crossing my fingers for Q. So
yes, definitely, that would be great. That makes sense as well. Completely, I think you could definitely do Q in this new era. I think it'd be great fun. Oh, yeah, and John Delancey, absolutely, John Delancey coming back, I think would work really well. So, yeah, we'll see. But yeah, we're going to talk about Discovery today and go through the fourth episode. So The Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry first aired on October the 8th, 2017, was written by Jesse Alexander and Aaron Eli Colletti. I probably terribly mispronounced that name. And directed by Olatunde Osunsanmi. Again, apologies if I've mispronounced that one. This episode continues the sort of introductory part of Discovery, really, with tensions and stakes high as Starfleet continue in their efforts to end the war with the Klingons. Burnham begins to settle into a new position aboard the Discovery, and at the same time, deep in on the border of Klingon Federation space, Vok faces a dark night of the soul, I guess. So this episode, roughly then, if you were to give it a grading out of 10, just off the top of your head, Greg, what would you give it, and what did you generally overall think about The Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry?
Well, like I said, to some degree, it's hard to sort of pick out individual episodes because this very much is, following very closely on the heels of the previous one, since we are still, in a way, this is like episode 2, since we just met Discovery in the previous episode. We're still sort of like, it feels like this is a continuation of Burnham still trying to figure out her place aboard Discovery and who the hell is this Lorca guy. But no, if I had to quantify it, I would say maybe 8, just because there's a part of me that resists. You want to save the 10s for the superlatives, because otherwise you have nowhere to go. Yeah. When they the really, 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 jaw dropper one, But no, this picks up, flows very nicely. Like I said, it blurs in my head a bit with Context is for Kings, since it's still sort of, our plot here is Burnham still kind of getting oriented, and indeed us as a viewer still getting oriented to, Discovery and meeting. Is this the episode where we first meet Dr. Culber, I think?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
It's actually kind of also the last time we see Vok as Vok.
Yeah.
And the weird thing, rewatching it, was now watching it with hindsight, knowing what we now know about Lorca, knowing what we now know about Vok. Oh, you're looking back for, I know where this is going,
Well, I felt a similar thing with Lorca, particularly in these early episodes. Now, when you know where it all heads, and I think in a couple of episodes' time, Lethe is one where that really does become apparent in the B plot. And you start looking back, and in this one, like you say, particularly Vok, it's interesting to watch them back with that distance and knowing where it goes. I mean, I'd say I'd give this around a 7 out of 10 myself, and because I think it works pretty well, and I think watching them back. So this is only my second watch, Greg. Now I've gone through for recording these, and it's been a couple of years since I watched them when they first came out, and it's working better for me than it did the first time around. I think because knowing where it goes. The episodes themselves, I don't know if you feel this way, but they feel a little bit more rounded and satisfying as stories than maybe they did at the beginning when we watched them first time round.
I think also now we know the characters, and we're also just, you can sort of appreciate the stories on their own terms. You're not distracted by sort of, where does this fit in the continuity, and the new art direction and all that, Yeah. So I admit I kept peering. Again, hindsight, every time Vok popped up, I'm in fact literally trying to peer past the silicon on his face to, now that I know what I know, do I see who behind the silicon? But he says cryptically, just in case there's anybody on this listening who doesn't know what happens to Vok.
Well, we might have to put a spoiler warning in.
Next time we see him,
Yeah, he does. And yeah, if we put a spoiler warning in, because we may touch on this, although we may not, we'll see. But when we talk about Vok.
Well, as you point out, this is 2017, so we are now, I don't know what the statute of limitations is, but we're now 3 years on. So
I think we're allowed. I think we're allowed now to spoil it. But I think, yeah, there's some good constituent episode parts to this episode, I think, which are interesting. This is the second longest Star Trek title ever of an episode. Can you guess, Greg, what the longest one might be off the top of your head?
For the world is hollow and I have touched the sky.
Very good. Maximum points. Well done. That's good. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously I really like that original series episode as well. But this has the second longest episode title ever, and it's overall, I think, a fairly well received episode. It is the first episode, I think, to feature Culber, as you say, and like I say, there's some interesting aspects to it. So let's talk a little bit more then in depth about this episode.
Okay.
I really was struck by the beginning, the very opening moment, where you see what looks like some kind of really sort of synthetic realm going on, and then it pulls back, and it's actually the replication of Burnham's Starfleet uniform. I thought that was really interesting way they did that.
Well, they like to occasionally show us go behind the scenes. Well, not show us how some of these familiar mechanisms work, like the sort of cutaway drawings of how the turbo lifts work we see later on,
Yeah.
Yeah, it fooled me again the second time, too.
Yeah.
It had been about 3 years, so I'm like, oh, is this the, fungus realm or something?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's,
It's kind of tricking you into that, though, isn't it? It's kind of trying to make you think you're in some kind of weird spatial realm. But no, it's a replicator. I think that, in a way, though, that sums up one of the themes of the episode, which is all about Burnham grappling partly with Georgiou's death, but also the trying to, the whole bookending aspect of Georgiou's last will and testament, which is what Tilly then brings in to her in this tube, and Burnham puts it away, and she can't face looking at that. And I thought the idea of having a uniform right at the very beginning that she has to put back on, but she's been completely stripped of her rank and title, and a lot of people don't even think she should be wearing it, I thought was quite good to layer into the episode. Again,
yes, her trying to get her footing here on Discovery. And one thing I did notice, by the way, going back and watching the first 4 episodes again, was, if you go back and watch the Vulcan Hello, you get to see Burnham before all the angst, and she's actually, she's so upbeat and cheery and cocky back in that very first episode, and now to see her just sort of beaten down,
Yeah.
And again, trying to get her bearings on Discovery and figure out Lorca, as we were all trying to figure out Lorca. She's sort of our sort of audience surrogate here is, okay, who is this weird guy at the fortune cookies and the dark lighting,
Yeah, because immediately you get the sense that he's not like Giorgio. We said, I think I may have talked about this before, but Giorgio is very much, and when you go back now and you watch the early episodes with Michelle Yeoh in that original Giorgio part, she's very much a Starfleet captain of old. She's cultured. Yeah. She's very, very good at what she does. She's got a crew have respect for her. She's almost like the Picard model of a captain in some ways. And then to kill her off is, and then replace her with Lorca, is very indicative of what Discovery is trying to sort of decrypt, I think, with Star Trek.
And I remember endless debates on the time about whether or not, Lorca was appropriately, Starfleet enough, or was enough the kind of captain we expect. And I remember, of course, we all know there's another shoe being dropped down the road. But at the time, I remember the arguments being that, well, if you actually look around the edges of Star Trek, he's a Starfleet captain like, Jellicoe or Ron Tracy. Yeah. We have seen some less sympathetic Starfleet captains along. It was not, uncanonical to see a Starfleet captain with a somewhat harder edge, because we've seen them. They're just usually the guest star characters, the one whom, Kirk butts heads with,
Yeah.
And you imagine Picard would probably be butting heads with, Lorca if they were in the same generation,
Yeah.
He's more like Jellicoe or Ron Tracy or Ben Maxwell or whoever,
Yeah, no, he is. He absolutely is of that mould, isn't he? He's that, ultimately darker captain, but he's also just edgier. They were all very much edgier, I love Jellicoe. I love that character. I'd love to have seen Ronnie Cox appear more as Jellicoe particularly. But yeah, all of that model, that harder edged, captain who, not that Kirk and Picard and, even Janeway and Archer weren't strong-willed, but Lorca's just, he's a different complexion, and I think you see that within this episode. I think with at the beginning when they're doing the training exercise with the Klingon attack, and they don't survive, and he goes, "Oh, we're dead." Like he's very regimented and tough in that way. And ready for battle, I suppose. He's like a wartime captain.
Every time you start to think that he's too nasty, they trick us by, he's trying to save those poor colonists, or he's pointing out that if we get the war over, then we can use the spore drive to. In fact, a whole lot of it, like I said, the sort of tension that drives that episode is, okay, is Lorca a bad guy or not? And again, this is now blurring with context. I'm thinking of context is for Kings, where at first Burnham thinks he's all about developing bioweapons with those spores. And no. It's a wonderful warp drive. And once we get this war over, dangling the carrot as well as the stick, then we can go back to exploring and do all that wonderful Starfleet stuff. But none of that's going to happen unless, we can, defeat the Klingons, get this war over with, so we can go back to being the Starfleet you want us to be.
The ends justifying the means, I suppose, is his way of looking at it. And
even the means, the ends he's dangling are ends that might actually appeal to Burnham, not just he's not just about revenge or whatever. he has a good job of looking like he's got some better angels there as well, but. You're never quite sure where you stand with him. Okay, is he which again is the tension that plays out of the started in context is for Kings and plays out until we sort of go through the looking glass, as it were. Okay, later on.
Yeah, it plays that uncertainty nicely, definitely, because on the one hand, like you say, he's trying to protect these colonists and he's trying to do the right thing, even when Admiral Cornwell is it, and I think it might be the first time we see Jane Brooke as well in this episode. I think that
right, actually, yeah. She calls to tell him about the situation on the colony.
Yeah, and I mean she's another really good character who they get a good amount of mileage out of, and I think I feel like Cornwell's, and I'm sure we'll talk more about her in future on this podcast, but I feel like Cornwell's one of those characters that the actor, in this case Jane Brooke, brought to the character, and then they wrote more for Cornwell because she was really good in the role and she brought her own inflection to that character. That's my sense anyway. And so introducing her and having that difficult sort of rub against Starfleet that Lorca has, in that his argument is, you said I can fight this war however I want, and at the same time they're concerned about how far he might go with this. So it's a nice push pull I like, which is there in this episode, and there's more done with that as we go along.
Push pull is a good way to put it. Again, every time you start to think that Lorca's a bastard, well, then they show us those poor kids down in the colony, and how about that? Discovery arrived just in time to save the day, and like the Lone Ranger and the cavalry. So okay, maybe all that drilling and haranguing paid off.
Yeah.
So even though we end on a note, because of course the poor tardigrade is getting tortured, and we already see that's an issue.
Well, exactly, and that's at the beginning. At the beginning we see that, don't we? And that Burnham, and I suppose it plays out more in the next episode, Choose Your Pain, which is where you have a lot more of the difficulty with the tardigrade and the choices that are made with that. But in this episode, it's very clear, isn't it, that it's a creature that's violent, but it's also being exploited at the same time. So there is that balance there.
And the episode jumping ahead, kind of ends on that note of Burnham looking like she's having qualms of conscience already, you know.
Which I mean, I like that because I think it's one of the things with Burnham is that she's hard at first to really fall in love with as a character because she is very. Not to say that you can't fall in love with a Vulcan, but she is very Vulcan in a different way to how, you know, when you first meet Spock in the original series, he is kind of charming in the way that Leonard Nimoy kind of plays that role and how he bounces off Kirk. But Burnham is very, you know, kind of rigid in those, and then that causes her to go to mutiny essentially because she believes that the way to do it is her way, and she's not learned what she needs to learn from the crew around her. But so it feels like, and the fact then she loses everything and she has to start working her way back up slowly. I think she starts to thaw. Certainly by the second season, Burnham has thawed quite significantly, which is logical and makes sense. But in these early episodes, she's at first a little bit brittle, and I think having her really have that problem with the tardigrade and the way it's being treated helps us get into her humanity a little bit, I think, which is a good move.
Well, Spock also had the advantage that when we first see him, he's already got established relationships with Kirk and McCoy, and he's part of the crew. And, you know, there's a sort of easy camaraderie there, whereas at this point, Burnham is still the new kid in school. Okay, you know, and the new kid in school who has arrived under a cloud. Yeah. It's funny, actually, to go back and watch this episode and see her kind of having this prickly relationship with, say, Stamets, and her and Tilly not quite being best friends yet or anything, you know.
Yeah.
And still, indeed, kind of a quasi-adversarial relationship with Saru.
Because, well, that's the thing. Those two have the pre-existing relationship, don't they? But it's been completely destroyed at this point by the fact he can't forgive her for Giorgio being killed and her betrayal. And Saru is he's another character who is difficult to warm to at first because he's very serious and stressed out all the time because of his threat ganglia, and again very rigid in his thinking, and he seems to judge very fast, and he's decided what he thinks Burnham is in many ways. So I you know, when looking back at first, I found it hard to sort of find my hook into these characters, but looking back now, I think it just makes for good drama, and I don't think it's massively different really from particularly how DS9 started, because DS9 they weren't all friends at the beginning of DS9. It took them time to really warm to each other.
Tears Bashir a new one in the pilot episode, you know.
Yeah, and there's the whole adversarial relationship between Kira and Sisko at the very beginning, and it almost feels like when you look back at DS9, they all were adversarial, except maybe
unless my memory is correct, I think Odo's first line in the very first DS9 is something like, "Who the hell are you?" to Sisko. Okay.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. And the only real, I suppose, good relationships in that series at the very beginning were like Kira and Odo, and Sisko and Dax, because they had that pre-existing relationship. But yeah, there was a lot of conflict. So I think really looking at Discovery, it works in that context now when you look back, because it's taking its time to have Burnham find her place in that crew. And it works, like I say, it works better on a second viewing than it did first time around, for sure. What did you think though of her? I mean, just tracking back slightly to the pilot, what did you think of the whole mutiny aspect, Greg? You know, and choosing to begin a series with not a captain for one thing, a lieutenant commander who's then disgraced, and have Burnham be the main character. What do you think of that in terms of how it's different from Star Trek, particularly before?
Oh, I remember, like I said, that was 3 years ago, and that seems forever now. But yeah, no, I thought it was, I remember really liking the whole mutiny thing. That was a very dramatic way. It got things off to a bang. And again, at this point, this is Star Trek series number 7. You come to it wanting to see things you haven't seen before. Oh, that's a new way to start a Star Trek series, we at this point, we'd seen, something like 6 previous Star Trek pilots. Okay. that this felt new and fresh and interesting, and like something made in the 21st century rather than 1987 or even 1966, The whole face down on the bridge, that was like, wow, that was like gripping, dramatic stuff. This is the kind of thing people complain occasionally about Voyager, that there wasn't enough tension between the Maquis and the Starfleet crew. They just, within episode 1, they were one big happy family again. That's not really the case here with Discovery. Okay.
Yeah. And I just think when I think back, I mean, that's absolute. I had real problems with that with Voyager, as did so many other people. And I always think back to that amazing Ronald Moore interview that he did, where he broke down all of the issues with Voyager in that sense, and he was so right. He was very candid about that. And I think that was going into Discovery, even though Discovery had its problems behind the scenes with writers and people pulling out and things like that. It certainly was devised this show with a very base level of conflict between these characters, and wanted to, really build them up to points where they did learn to trust each other, but still have like very Star Trek sweet characters in there, like Tilly. I mean, Tilly's great because she's that really, through and through hopeful, maybe quite naive, but very hopeful and friendly character that is very human and very grounded. And I really like her. You see a little bit of it in this episode, don't you? But I really like her interactions with Burnham. I think they when they're bunkmates, they play off each other so well, I think.
It blurs my head. No, it was the previous episode where she steals Tilly's drool to get into the sport garden. Yes, right.
That's right, yeah. That's taking your bunkmate friendship far. but yeah, it does have nice character interactions in that sense. And so, yeah, I mean, the episode really is particularly about them exploring this relationship between the tardigrade and the spore drive, and how it powers this revolutionary drive. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, obviously, as someone who's written for Star Trek, for years, who's written Star Trek for years, is very, very knowledgeable about the way it works and the intricacies. How did you find them introducing this entirely new mechanism of space travel in Discovery?
Oh, I thought it was cool and interesting because, we've done the lithium crystals before,
Yeah.
Again, like I said, this is Star Trek series number 7. Here we've already had like something like, I don't know the numbers, episodes. If you're not going to do something different, what's the point, Yeah,
definitely.
But granted, there's a fine line here. I joke that trying to strike the balance between, hey, this isn't like the old stuff, and hey, this is just the same old stuff, is a tricky balancing, act to pull off, and you're always going to sort of tip over one way or the other.
Yeah.
Some folks are going to go, I want to see something, we've seen this before. Or people are like, no, this isn't like what we've seen before. We want what we've seen before. So trying to make it new and the same at the same time is the challenge faced by any long-running 50-year-old franchise, Whether you're talking James Bond, Doctor Who, or Planet of the Apes, or whatever,
I think it's true. I mean, I was dubious. I won't lie about it. And my inner sort of continuity enjoyer of Star Trek was a little bit like, oh, I don't know about this, because it's very, very different. And if they have a spore drive, then in the mid-23rd century, they are like so far ahead in terms of what they could do and all this kind of thing. How does it fit with, why aren't they using this in the 23rd or 24th century? All these questions then come up in my mind. But I think you're right. I think you have to sort of put that aside in a way and think about when you're starting something new, then I suppose you can be too constrained by rules, can't you? You can be too constrained by, the canon and the specific details. And I guess as a writer, you don't want to feel like you have to write in a box, in terms of the ideas and the science fiction concepts you have.
Well, again, like I said, it's a balancing act. When I'm writing one of the novels, I've got 2 shelves of Star Trek, reference books on my shelves. And yes, I will pull down my technical manuals and my Star Trek encyclopedia and my Klingon dictionary and try to get all the nitpicky details right. Because if I don't, I know I will hear about it. And not just necessarily from CBS, but from the fans. But, at the same time, like, again, you're always sort of looking for, okay, what haven't they done on the show, or what can you do new? And again, not to diss, The Departed. One of my issues with Enterprise was hyped as this bold new vision. It was going to be rougher, grittier, set in a more primitive era. And then Enterprise has aged fairly well, but at the time I remember watching, this is basically Next Gen meets Voyager. They've just put on a fresh coat of paint and it's the same show again, I was sort of, it felt like a 1990s show that was airing, in fact, in the 21st century,
Yeah.
And, I remember thinking at the time there was a bit of a gap between the rhetoric, the hype. Oh, check out Enterprise. It's going to be new, fresh, and exciting. And, this feels like season 8 of Voyager, but with slightly different, a slightly different paint job. I mean, we got a Ferengi episode in the first season, here are the Borg again,
Yeah.
It was even sort of paced and shot like Next Gen, the same sort of, compared to other shows of that era, it was starting to look like a bit of a relic, But that being said, I actually watched Enterprise and it actually has aged better than I thought it did. Just at the time I was expecting something sort of new and radical and different. I like to say Discovery is the show I wanted Enterprise to be.
Yeah. That's a nice way of putting it, actually. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, and I think it's always the way, isn't it? Whenever a new Star Trek series comes out, the irony is that even though people spend their entire lives wishing for wanting new Star Trek, especially with the gap that we had between Enterprise and this, over a decade. And then once you get it, people are like, but this isn't like what it was like before. So it's a really difficult balancing act, in that I think like many things with time and distance, quite often they are easier to appreciate. I think there will be the same thing, even though I think Picard has definitely been appreciated better. The first season of that has had more appreciation than Discovery's did. I think even that, to people who maybe were a bit on the fence with quality, and I admittedly am one of those people in terms of how quality it is, I think you'll see it differently. I think there'll be a break and a pause, and you go back to it, and you'll see things in it that you didn't see first time. And I definitely think that's happening with Discovery now.
Well, I'm amused now to see, going back. I remember when Enterprise debuted, and it was a prequel. I remember there were, it was controversial in its day, and it doesn't look right, and it conflicts with the cage, and it amuses me now to see Enterprise, regarded as a beloved chapter of the canon, unlike that new heretical new stuff,
Yeah.
15 years from now, when we get, I joke that when we get, Star Trek, the new Star Trek, wait a minute, this isn't consistent with Discovery,
Yeah. Oh, it's not as good as Discovery.
Venerable elder statesman of the general,
Yeah. It almost certainly will be, which is just the way it works, isn't it? I suppose, but
there is a certain degree where I even remember when DS9, debuted. I actually had Trekkie friends who said, "Well, it's good, but it's not Star Trek," it's too dark. It's not on a starship, et cetera, et cetera. Have you seen the Deep Space Nine documentary?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I
remember
really enjoyed that.
There's that funny sequence where they're all reading message board comments from the first season about, oh God, what is this horrible show? It's spitting on Star Trek's grave, and now it's again this beloved institution,
And I absolutely think to some extent Discovery will, and it's a classic pattern. I think Discovery's following the classic pattern of the classic Star Trek pattern of, certainly from the 80s onwards, two slightly difficult first two seasons that are figuring out what the show is, and then season 3 you hit the ground running. And I'm hopeful that Discovery is going to find that happen to it as well, and that by the new season will really be really, really fantastic. But then I would genuinely say that the first season of Discovery is one of the better first seasons of any of the Star Trek shows. I think watching it, it does have a better understanding, and episodes like this make me think this. It has a better understanding of where it's going and what it is this early on than TNG, DS9, Voyager, and to some extent Enterprise all had. And I think they were figuring out more as they go, whereas I think Discovery, certainly maybe the first chunk of episodes, does have an identity. I think it doesn't understand that it's coming from this position of like we say, Burnham as this character who is stripped down, of all her rank and all her title and everything like that, and has to work her way up, and this mysterious ship that's got this morally compromised captain, and And it's exploring plenty of things. You know, this episode alone, you've got the fact it's exploring the exploitation of nature, essentially, with the tardigrades. It's a natural sort of spaceborne creature. And then on the flip side of it, you have everything going on with the Klingons, which I dare say we'll talk about in a second. But I think it knows what it is more than I thought.
But also, to a certain degree, there's a little bit of apples and oranges here, because we were just, Discovery is telling one big serialized story, you know, as opposed to, like I said, the previous shows, especially in their first seasons, were all very episodic. So it's, that was the good episode, that was the bad episode, And so, again, so it's very sort of, comparing the first season of, say, TNG, which was, basically 20 individual different stories with trying to take episode 4 here out of context. No, you need to see episode 4. It flows directly out of the previous 3 episodes, and it flows directly into it sets up stuff that will pay off down the road. So it's very hard to compare it in isolation. And again, looking at this first season, which is one big story, versus, I like that episode. That episode wasn't so good. That was a dumb episode. But it was a different story. It had a different ending. And I think part of it also, we've been trained, Star Trek fans, to expect a resolution.
Yeah.
One of the things you hear a lot, like I said, I spend too much time on message boards possibly, is, hold off. The thing is, these stories aren't over yet. Oh, I can't believe they're doing this. Well, it's like, watching the beginning of the Doomsday Machine, and then, who is this crazy William Wyndham character? Well, you don't get an answer by the end of the episode. You're going to have to wait, another 10 episodes to get an answer here.
Yeah.
You will get your happy Star Trek ending. I think sometimes if the new show is still darker, it's because we're used to them, any crisis being wrapped up in 45 minutes,
Yeah.
You'll get your happy ending, but it's going to be 10 episodes from now.
Yeah, I think that's true.
It's like if Kirk spent 10 episodes wondering about whether or not he was going to push Edith Killer in front of the truck or not.
Wow, imagine that.
Dark if we had to watch Kirk debating this for 10 episodes.
It's true. It is true, and that's I think Discovery is less, certainly this first, say, 8 or 9 episodes. There is it's serialized, but there are more individual episodes and stories within those episodes than people give them credit for, I think. And in particularly episodes like Lethe, which is exploring Burnham and Sarek, and Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, which is a time loop story with, yes, it has Harry Mudd in it, and yes, it's continuing on stories, but it's still doing things within that non-serialized structure while sort of juggling both. And I think it does it better than, and this is an example, I think, of a fairly serialized story, but one which does manage to tell, I feel like it wraps the story around the whole idea of the exploitation of the tardigrade and exploring what the spore drive can do, and saving the Klingon colony. Ultimately, I think it does tell that story within this episode. It's just then teeing up things to come. It's teeing up the issue about the Ripper, the tardigrade, and even though it kills Landry, doesn't it? It kills the security chief quite savagely and unexpectedly, and so it's violent, but also it's something that is an alien to, like in the classic Star Trek tradition, to understand and try and figure out that it's not just one thing. And I think it tells that story well. Yeah, well, yeah. The Horta, yeah.
Remember, burned several people to a crisp in the first part of that episode.
Yeah, it does actually. Yeah. Thinking of that though, with Landry, I mean, what did you think about the fact that they do kill Rekha Sharma's character? Like, because she, even though she's only been in it like an episode and a half, she's essentially created to be one of the main Discovery characters. It seems she's in Context is for Kings a fair bit. She's in this episode, and she's killed. I mean, did that come as a shock? Do you remember? Throwing
my brain back 3 years, I think I remember being startled by that, and I remember we all probably thought she had it coming too.
Yeah.
But yeah. So.
Is that a sign, though, that the show is willing to take risks, and actually establish a character that you think is going to be a regular and then kill them quite... Tasha Yar style, almost.
But that wasn't so much intended. That was just sort of an accident of, Denise Crosby wants to leave the show,
It's true, yeah.
Yes, that's kind of akin even to, I think this is just more evidence that, like I said, Discovery feels like a modern show that you watch in the 21st century. Most shows these days, like I said, the idea that plot armor protects the regulars, it has kind of gone away. And you don't even need to look at things like Walking Dead or Game of Thrones, but even, Grey's Anatomy. Regular characters will die often because characters, so you see this is more likely to happen, So another thing that makes it feel like you're watching a Star Trek show made for modern audiences rather than a show where it's simply, you knew when Kirk, Spock, Sulu, and, O'Malley beamed down that O'Malley was toast. Even as a kid, I knew, okay, give me, Chekhov, Sulu, and,
that guy,
and Gowali. Okay, Gowali is toast. Okay, and if there was two of them, I remember even as a kid, I used to joke about this. It's like, okay, oh good God, they're bringing down three red shirts. This planet is really dangerous. Give me O'Rourke, Smithson, and Jensen. Oh God, this planet is. Dear. Kill off three of them.
I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? Because Landry isn't a red shirt in that same sense, but then she's a character that you don't necessarily need to have around. So I think it's not like, I mean, if they'd have, and I mean, they later in the season, jumping ahead, spoilers just in case people haven't seen it, but the death of Kolba at that point, I think was more of a shocker because you had spent time with that character and you understood that character was the Doctor and had the relationship with Stamets. So that was a bit of a gasp moment, and I think that's a different thing I think Landry's death is more about establishing the tardigrades, the balance, as I say, between the tardigrade being a killer and also being a creature to protect. And I think it's less about the character and more about what they're trying to do for the tardigrade story, I suppose. But which is fine.
She's kind of the equivalent of one of the red shirts who gets incinerated by the Horta, except that she's around for one previous episode. And had a lot more dialogue and got a lot more screen time.
But she is still a red shirt in a way. Yeah, I suppose she is really. Yeah, that's true.
So, like I said, it's hard to tell because at that point, there's a sense in which the previous there's almost two pilots. There's the Vulcan Hello and the Battle of Buenos Aires, which are like the first pilot, which feature an entire crew, and then there's Context is for Kings in this episode, which are like the second pilot because we're still learning who the Discovery crew is. And to a certain degree, like I said, they trick us a little bit. We don't know, this is Landry. She's the security officer. And, is she a regular? Is she going to be a major character? And, apparently she wasn't. Okay,
Yeah.
But we don't know because, typically most previous Star Trek shows, the security officer from Worf on, or from Yar on, have been sort of major, you got your medical officer,
Yeah.
And as I recall, even in this episode, we only see Colbert pretty briefly. So I think we're sort of getting a sense of, we have not yet, if you didn't have him reading all behind the scenes stuff, you might not necessarily realize that he's supposed to be a major character,
Yeah.
I think he shows up briefly to sort of patch up Stamets, and that's about it,
And that's it. And that's interesting, actually, because, Discovery doesn't necessarily hold to the traditional characters. You're right in that all the other shows, even if with DS9 it was slightly different given it was a space station, but you had the commander, you had the first officer, you had the doctor, you had the security guy, you had woman, you had the
there's certain slots that have to be filled.
But Discovery doesn't do that in that the helm, the characters at the helm are very supporting characters for over both of these seasons so far, and they may get more to do potentially. Characters like Detmer, who I think everybody is hoping will get more to do in future, but they're much more sort of supporting characters. And then, whereas Tilly's a cadet, an engineering sort of cadet, Burnham's a mutineer, so and they're key characters, and that's a big difference, isn't it, with Discovery?
Oh, yeah, I think that actually confused some folks because we're sort of used from, the 90s era of Star Trek to assume that our regulars are going to be the bridge crew.
Yeah.
And they're not, haven't even bothered to introduce, no, the bridge crew aren't the stars this time. We're sort of, okay, the guy at the helm, there isn't, that's Sulu, that's Geordi,
Yeah. It's
more sort of diffuse. And if the show, in the fullness of time, will no doubt, like you said, flesh out Detmore or something, but no, it's not like the people who are posted at the navigational helm are necessarily going to be one of our major characters, We have other major characters. The Klingon characters are arguably, Vok and Tyrell are more of the stars, regular cast stars of the show than the guy who's sitting at the navigation station,
Yeah. That's a big change. That good segue really to talk about those two, really, because I think Vok and L'Rell are. I mean, I really like what they do with the Klingons in this early stage. I think the T'Kuvma stuff was really good in the first couple of episodes. I think, obviously, you didn't see them in the last episode, but it brings this. It sort of follows on from the first two in that they're on the sarcophagus kind of ship, and Vok is kind of, the plans of him as like the torchbearer, I think it is, of T'Kuvma, it's sort of gone away. The houses are now fighting the Federation. Much has changed considering where they were in the beginning, and I think it's I liked what they did with these characters in this. I mean, I remember them talking about how they wanted it to feel like it was a bit Game of Thrones at the beginning when they first aired this episode, this season, in that they wanted the Klingons to sort of stand alone as their own story and be more than just the villains of the piece. And I think it does that, even though you don't really see Vok again in the same way. You do see L'Rell, obviously, and she plays an increasingly, again, I think because of Mary Chieffo's personality and character and what she brings to that role, I think they give L'Rell more to do. But I think, I liked the way they were portrayed, and I was interested in their story on its own in this.
And you had the whole Donner Party situation basically going on the ship that, they're stranded without food and debating cannibalism and all that,
Yeah. It's pretty. And discussing whether or not they cannibalise the Shenzhou as well to get the dilithium processor and things like that. And the reality that we find out they've eaten Giorgio as well. I was like, oh my God. Like, it was bad enough that they killed Giorgio off, and it's like, oh no, she's been eaten by Klingons. It's like, oh my God.
There's actually a deleted scene in that episode. I watched it on the DVD, not via the internet. And there's actually a deleted scene, and the deleted scene, which I can see why it was deleted. It's not essential, but it's a Klingon scene. It's Vok and Tyrell. It seems to be early on in the episode, basically discussing the whole sort of food issue and establishing the Donner Party situation. We see a Klingon warrior die of starvation, and they have a bit of a debate as to whether or not they should, in fact, cannibalize this dead Klingon. And that, I guess maybe it's redundant because they established the whole starvation issue later on, but it sort of was intended clearly to, okay, we are really in bad shapes, enough so that Vok and Tyrell kind of have a bit of a debate as to whether or not they should eat their fellow crewmen as well as the, humans,
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, presumably cut. Well, I was going to say presumably cut for length, but do they have to worry about that? I mean, we get it on Netflix over here, so I don't. And obviously, Netflix isn't held to any kind of network things. But with CBS All Access, does it work in that sense that there are commercial breaks, or do they have to worry about? Do they have to worry about that or length or anything like that?
I think so. Again, like I said, it's streaming. I sprung for the no commercial plan, so I don't see the commercials.
Right, okay.
But, presumably they have more flexibility. I would imagine this would be less about trying to, we only have so many minutes an hour as maybe just a pacing issue. Maybe they figured they had one too many scenes of here we are stuck on this ship debating our options and we don't need this scene of them,
Yeah.
Like I said, it's an interesting debate as they debate. It kind of establishes, again, how dire their situation is. But I suppose you could argue that this point is made in subsequent scenes as well, That
yeah.
Straits and they're running out of food. Did we need one more scene early on establishing, boy, we're in dire straits and we're running out of food,
Yeah. Creative decision then to delete that one. But it's interesting. Adds a bit more of inflection to what's going on with the Klingon storyline. But I think generally, I think that comes off well, and it leaves you wondering quite what's going to happen to Vok. And I mean, like we said earlier, that spoiler. Given we're not going to talk about the introduction of Ash Tyler in the next episode, did you have any sort of sense that at the time, Greg, that these two were connected, that there was some sort of connective tissue?
I seem to remember, and again, having to throw my brain back 3 years, I wasn't actively seeking out spoilers, but I seem to remember there were rumors already going around on the internet, you know.
Yeah.
The problem these days of trying to do one of these serialized plotlines, alas, in the age of the internet, is you run the danger that you've got, you know, a cottage industry of websites all prowling IMDb, looking at behind-the-scenes information, and, you know. The fact that the actor playing Vox seemingly didn't exist had kind of already been spotted by eagle eyes on the internet, you know.
Yeah.
I can't remember if when he goes off and she's saying, "You must give up everything," I made the connection then. I do remember that when Tyler showed up, there were rumors that he was Vox floating around the internet, just because, again, it's very hard to keep secrets in the era of the internet when people have spy cameras and... you know, and there's 5 million spoiler sites on the internet, and you know, prowl IMDb. And I remember people discovering that the actor who played Vox didn't seem to actually exist except on paper, you know.
Yeah.
So I will say, like I said, watching it now for the second time, I was peering at Vox trying to see Ash Tyler underneath the silicone, and I was not. That's good makeup. I cannot. Yeah. I could, if I did not know that he comes back surgically transformed into a human later on, I would never have guessed it. And if we lived in an area where the internet did not exist, and if I'd had a total wall of silence around me surrounding spoilers, I'll be honest, it would have suckered me. Okay, you know.
Yeah, I didn't see it coming, I have to say, and I think you're right. The makeup is excellent in that I couldn't tell that was Shazad Latif under there. It was very good, very well done, I think, in that sense, and just a very interesting way to take the character of Vox, who is an interesting character in himself, and I think it's where the fact he has to sort of lose everything and then end up Manchurian candidated, basically, is what happens to Ash Tyler and to Vox. So I think it's very interesting. It sets up an interesting mystery for the rest of the season, really.
Like I said, in hindsight, that Terrell makes a whole big point about how she doesn't want to be the leader. She doesn't want to be in command. Yeah. She wants to be the power behind the throne and everything, which, when you consider how things end up, also turns out to be rather ironic, you know.
Well, absolutely, yeah. That doesn't work out for her in that sense. And right now, they're sort of at the mercy of Cole, the guy who's sort of seized command of all the houses and he's waging the war against the Federation. So it sets up a decent Klingon antagonist there of himself, who, you know, we'll come into it later as well. But yeah, I think is there anything else before we? I mean, we've got some little bit of feedback from listeners actually just before we get to the end. But is there anything else you want to bring up about this episode, Greg? That I've got one thing, but I'll let you go first if there's anything else.
No, I can't think of. I was scribbling down some notes as I was, you know, watching it the other day. But yeah, sort of. Again, seeing it, it's interesting now to see it in the part of. It was interesting the first time around. It rewards rewatching because now you can see how it fits into the larger scheme of season one.
I agree, and you know, it's definitely forward in certain character relationships. I like the fact that there is the for Burnham. There is the follow up Saru conversation, apart from the one at the beginning where she's trying to make amends with him, you know, and he gives her a little bit of a. You know, his threat ganglia aren't going, and he gives her a little bit of a window into that. In that, you know, she'll fit well on Discovery. He can't forgive her, but there's a little bit of that mended there, and then the fact that
there's also a bit of a backhanded compliment when he says she's fit in working for Lorca. There's a bit of a backhanded compliment there.
Well, yeah, it's true.
Oh, you and Lorca will be perfect together. Well, yeah, that's you know.
Yeah, thanks for that. But yeah, and the fact that at the end you get the nice bookend with you get the message from Giorgio, you know, and the reminder of what the Starfleet captain you're used to is like. And I thought that was lovely, the fact she gives her the telescope that's been handed down for generations to Giorgio. I mean, it adds... the
telescope in the pilot episode, yeah.
Yes, we did, yeah. And I think it's a nice way of continuing Burnham's arc of coming to terms, really, with that and with what happened in the pilot and what she did. And it's a nice it's a nice bookend to the episode, I think, and it continues the ongoing themes really for Burnham. My last one thing that I noticed and that I did laugh when I looked into this was how Lorca's talk. I think when he's talking to Stamets about the spore drive and the research, and he references great people from history, from human history. So he talks about Einstein, Zephram Cochrane, Elon Musk. And apparently that wasn't in the script, but Jason Isaacs added it in the hopes that he'd get a Tesla. A little bit of product placement. But given how playful he seems to be, Jason Isaacs, that doesn't surprise me one bit, really. So that made me laugh. That was really good. But yeah, so let's get in and talk a little bit about some feedback. So a few things that some of the listeners on our Make It So Star Trek podcast fan group said about the episode. Heimholtz Watson said, I've only started to rewatch Discovery because of this podcast. I enjoyed it the first time, but this second time around is off the charts. Well, he's talking more about the season in general as opposed to this episode. But he says, I guess in the first episode we learned that the Federation would bring change to the Klingon Empire, and in this episode we can appreciate that is a good thing. That's an interesting comment to make, that I think he's sort of suggesting there that this war is something, because this war obviously is something that was suggested in Star Trek going back to the original series, wasn't it? It was sort of suggested. Was it something like the Omega Glory, I think, where they say there was a war? One of those episodes. And it's going back and it's sort of tapping into that area of Star Trek history that was unknown before this. So I think it was a. What do you think? Do you think it was a good choice to actually focus on this and reintroduce the Klingons in this way as the bad guys as such?
Well, it makes sense because, like I said, there is a sense in Errand of Mercy, which was the first Klingon episode.
That might be the one.
There's a history of conflict between the Federation. I don't think they got too much into detail. Oh, well, here's the war we were expecting, but there obviously is, a history of enmity between the Klingons and bad blood, before Errand of Mercy.
Errand of Mercy,
I suppose they could have done the Romulans as well, but the Romulan War, we actually kind of know more specifically we have a time frame for, and this is the wrong time frame for the Romulan War.
Yeah, so. Yeah. But it was very indistinct, wasn't it?
My memory, at least, is it's a little bit more ambiguous as to, though, of course, Enterprise had already filled in some blanks, that the Klingon thing is, unlike, let's say, why Klingons say the Romulans, as I recall, Balance of Terror kind of tells us explicitly, this is when the Romulan War was, this is how it fought, this is how it was ended, where the Klingons, the ongoing antagonism seems to have been, a pre-existing thing, but they don't really, as I recall, and I don't remember the reference from Omega Glory.
It might not
tell
be
us
in that
too
episode.
much about exactly why it is that the Klingons and how exactly the Klingons of the Federation are, have bad blood,
Yeah, it's fairly ambiguous. So there was a clear area coming into this that people like Brian Fuller wanted to, and Alex Kurtzman, and the people who created it, wanted to explore. And I think what they do is interesting. The way they approach it is very interesting. Brett Williams said, really good episode. First time in real time you sniff something is off about Lorca, which is what we said earlier. Definitely. And Craig McKenzie, former guest on the show, said this was an interesting one and a great showcase for Lorca as a different sort of captain. It's disappointing that he wasn't just allowed to be the kind of captain needed in war, because his point of view here was understandable. There's some weird choices, such as brutally killing Landry, but the ticking clock was well done, and Burnham relating to Ripper was good. Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about Lorca as a captain, but I think it's... What do you think about that statement that Lorca's approach is understandable? Do you think that his methods are justifiable here? That he's, because obviously they do save those colonists on Corvan 2. Do you think that Lorca, in one sense, deserves a little bit more credit for what he was willing to do, even though he had ulterior motives, and we know later on stuff? Do you think he deserves more credit for being that kind of captain at this time?
It's hard with hindsight. I do think there, a point can be made that in some ways, the whole Mirror Universe twist was interesting. That it's almost disappointing that we didn't keep him as sort of this different kind of Starfleet captain, rather than have him okay, he's a bad guy, come down firmly on. Spoiler alert, he's a bad guy later on,
Yeah.
He was arguably possibly more interesting when you couldn't quite get a grip on him and, hey, he saved everybody, he's great. He's not a nice guy, It is possible to prefer ambiguous Lorca to outright, evil Lorca at the end of the season,
I think I definitely prefer ambiguous Lorca, even though I think it's interesting what they do. Yeah, I agree with you. I think where he is at this point is some of the better Lorca stuff, I would say, and I really like that version of him. But thank you everyone for chipping in on what you thought about this episode. Keep any thoughts coming after the episode is out. Once you hear this, let us know what you think. But yeah, appreciate anyone's thoughts on what they thought of this one. And that brings us to the end, really, Greg. So it's been really nice to talk to you about this episode and dig into some Discovery with you. Hopefully not for the last time either, but because it'd be lovely to have you on again. But in the meantime, you're always writing, you're always busy, you've got books out here and there. So why don't you tell people about what you have out right now, particularly with Star Trek as well, that they might want to go away and read if they haven't, and what you're working on and what's coming up?
Well, in fact, on the Star Trek front, my most recent book, which is now I think, some months ago, is the Antares Maelstrom, which was a classic Trek novel set during the original 5-year mission.
Yeah.
That's been out for a while now. And actually, my current project is I have another Star Trek book, A Contest of Principles, which thank God I can talk about because it was announced like a week or so ago.
Yeah, I saw
even
that.
Though I've been having to keep mum about it. And that is coming out in November. And in fact, as I sit here, I'm sort of watching my box because I'm waiting for the page proofs of that book to show up. The next item on my agenda is to go through that book and proofread it one last time and do maybe one last round of revisions, and then it will be done. So that book is very far along. It's basically done. Sometime in the next week, we'll be doing the final proofread in that book with an eye to it coming out in November. And that's another classic Trek book. Very McCoy-centric, by the way. I don't want to be too spoilery about a book that hasn't even come out yet.
Yeah.
But one of my goals for that book was to do a lot with McCoy. It dawned on me that even though I've been writing Star Trek books for like 25 years now, that I had never done a McCoy-centric novel. So this is my love letter to Dr. McCoy, among other things,
Fantastic.
But not the Kirk and Spock and... people seem excited about this, too, because there is a synopsis online if you want to go look at the Simon & Schuster site or Amazon.
Yeah.
Chapel. I actually ended up using Nurse Chapel much more than I usually do. It's another character who, I had mea culpa neglected over the previous 18 books or so. And so, Chapel plays a big part of that. And I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised to see when the synopsis was published by Simon & Schuster a few weeks ago. Wait, Chapel's in this book? Chapel has stuff to do? Oh, I got to read this book because of Chapel. And I can say, in all honesty, that's not false advertising. Chapel plays a big part in this book.
Yeah.
Without saying too much, McCoy mysteriously goes missing, and Spock and Chapel have to find her. In fact, in my head, I jokingly, briefly considered titling this book, Star Trek: The Search for McCoy. So that might have been a little tongue-in-cheek.
I kind of wish you had.
Okay.
Does he get? Does he disappear after he gets injected with cordrazine and fall through a time portal, and then they have to go and look for him? Is that where
that's done? I think. Okay. I don't want Harlan Ellison's ghost coming after me.
Definitely not. No, absolutely. It does sound fantastic, though. It sounds really good. I mean, I genuinely have always been a huge fan of your work and really enjoyed for many years since I was young reading your Star Trek books. So it's great that they're still coming, that you're still doing them, that there's still some classic Trek stories to be told. So that's fantastic. So
I think by my count, the next book is Star Trek novel number 19. It would be my 19th Star Trek novel. So, or 18th Star Trek novel. So,
I mean, and the thing is that there are quite a lot of authors who wrote Star Trek that long ago that have fallen by the wayside, that don't write them anymore, that haven't been able to, and you've kept going, which I think is fantastic, and you're still involved and still writing these stories that people really, really enjoy. So it's great. Do you still find it a thrill to be able to tell these?
I fully appreciate how lucky I am to be able to, write Star Trek, for a living, as it were. And, it can occasionally be a struggle because I'm always looking for what haven't I already done. That's sort of my approach when I get called by pocketbooks and they say we need our Star Trek outline. I'm like, what haven't I done? And it's like, I really haven't never done a McCoy-centric novel. I love McCoy. Why have I never written a McCoy novel? So
yeah.
And I have a file. I'm not out of ideas yet. I have a brainstorming file. Excellent. It's not as thick as it used to be, but I've got ideas for more books down the road. So
wonderful. Well, I hope you get a chance to write them. That'd be great. And all I can say is to anyone listening, make sure you get onto Simon & Schuster and pre-order that book. A lot of you, if you are Star Trek fans, I dare say, have done that anyway, but make sure you do, guys, and support Greg doing this, because it's great stuff. So where can people find you as well online, just in case they want to find out more? And you've got a website, and are you on social media a lot and things like that?
I have a website, which can be found. You can just Google Greg Cox. I come right up. I'm not the politician in San Diego. I'm not the resident reviewer. I'm a Star Trek author. And beyond that, I tend to hang out on, Facebook and on the Trek BBS. And I used to go to conventions back before we were locked down. I hope to go to conventions again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll get out of the lockdown eventually, as we record. We're in the middle of the coronavirus, so
ordinarily I would be plugging my next convention appearance at this point.
Yeah, of course.
I will refrain now. So
yeah, absolutely.
A bit up in the air at the moment.
Well, yeah, we'll see where we are in a few months, but at the very least, guys, go and check out Greg's website and everything that he's doing there. So it'd be fantastic if you did. You can check us out, obviously, at social media. That'll be in the credits. You can find me at AJ Black Writer as ever, and make sure you check out the We Made This Podcast Network at We Made This Pod on Twitter, and wemadethispod.com for all the other podcasts that we've got going on the network, and we'll give you a little bit of a taster for that in a second. But just one final thank you, Greg, for coming on, and hope to have you back again at some point.
Sounds great.
And wonderful. And we'll be back next week. Well, Kurt will be back next week with another guest to talk about Choose Your Pain. So I'm going to get into my tardigrade chamber and zip off through the spores. So until next time, engage. Previously on the We Made This Network. The muscles from Brussels.
Very difficult times thanks to Bruce Lee, who makes a
or
literal
a brain aneurysm.
That
which
is debatable.
We're not really sure.
Is he hallucinating? Is he actually seeing Bruce Lee? I don't know.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yes, we will get to it. Okay.
Don't say the C word.
And I think Birdemic, it's so bad. I've seen student films on training on courses and examples and rough cuts that are just simply much, much better than what Birdemic presents you with.
Yeah, the students have more budget than they did, apparently.
I swear those birds are animated GIFs.
And in addition to that, you can tell that they're copied and pasted.
Yeah. For anyone who hasn't seen Birdemic, it is basically a shit version of Hitchcock's The Birds, with less plot, less tenseness. It's just shite, but because it's shite, it's entertaining.
The Movie Palace.
On a more kind of abstract point, I guess, I mean, just personally speaking, how important do you think films are to us, us personally or people generally, at a time like this? Very important, I'd say. What do you think?
So I think films, and classic films especially, offer two things in particular. It offers us a way to escape from our reality, and for us, and the opposite side of that, it allows us to process our emotions.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This Podcast Network. Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast, was created and is produced and hosted by Tony Black and Kurt North. You can find the show on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard and on Facebook in the Make It So, a Star Trek podcast fan group discussion group. Check out the We Made This network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and on Facebook by typing in We Made This, and you can find all of our shows on our website, wemadethispod.com. Thanks for listening.